Winning the deal isn't the finish line. It's where revenue breaks for most companies. When the deal is won, something predictable happens. Sales celebrates, leadership relaxes, and the customer enters the post-sales machine. And that's the moment everyone stops paying attention. But that's the moment revenue starts leaking. Renewal doesn't kill revenue. Hands off do. I'm Jelena and this is AI for Sales Edge, where leaders see how AI is changing the way teams plan, sell, and grow. Because revenue is not a funnel, it's a chain. And chains don't break at the end. They break at the first weak link. Here is where this gets real, because I've seen this happening. Once the contract is signed, the customer doesn't land in one place. They move across functions. Sales hands off to onboarding, onboarding hands off to CS, CS hands off to support, finance waits for renewal, product waits for feedback. Everyone owns a slice, no one owns the throat line. That's the failure. The organization designed revenue for stages, not continuity. 6 months later, a QBR rolls around and someone asks, were they supposed to expand? On the renewal call, CS talks adoption, product talks roadmap, finance talks pricing, and nobody talks about why the customer bought in the first place. That's not churn. That's the chain of value breaking. Companies don't lose expansion in renewal. They lose it in the moment nobody protects adoption. Not because the customer wasn't a fit, because the organization couldn't maintain the chain of value, from sales to adoption to renewal. For years, the assumption was simple. If every team managed their stage, the customer will be fine. Sales closes, onboarding activates, CS drives adoption, support fixes issues, finance renews, product improves. Clean on paper, fragile in reality. The shift is from function-optimized revenue to system-optimized revenue. Because customers don't move in stages, they move in continuity. And continuity is where revenue earns the right to renew, expand, and compound. This is not about retention. It's about compounding revenue, margin, and predictability. So when this breaks, leaders usually blame collaboration or communication. But that's not what failed. The mechanism was structural. The system couldn't carry intent, context, and accountability across the revenue lifecycle. When intent breaks, the reason they brought disappeared. When context breaks, value realization stalls. When accountability dilutes, nobody protects the revenue. That's where most revenue breaks, not at the renewal, but at the first fracture of intent, which leads to the question nobody likes answering. Who actually owns continuity? Not sales, not onboarding, not CS. Continuity sits above functions. That's why it belongs with RevOps and CRO, because revenue doesn't fail inside silos. It fails between them. When continuity is designed into the system, revenue stops behaving like hands-off and start behaving like a life cycle. If nobody owns continuity, nobody owns expansion. Now, this is the point where people expect me to say, AI fix it all. That's not what happened. AI didn't enter as automation. It entered as infrastructure. AI system began to maintain intent, value conditions for adoption, and the signal that show momentum or risk. Not to make team faster, to make the model remember. Because revenue cannot scale on memory. It scales on continuity. And here is the important part. AI didn't remove ownership. It removed the excuses for losing context. And that's the part most organizations never design for. You see this most clear at scale. At low volume, continuity is carried by people. At high volume, it either becomes a system or it disappears. At 10 customers, continuity is manual. At 100 customers, continuity is a luck. At 1,000 customers, continuity is a system or it isn't. Scale doesn't create the problem. It exposes the operating model that never existed. When continuity breaks, revenue becomes non-linear. Forecasts become speculative, renewals become reactive, expansions becomes opportunistic. Leadership stop managing revenue and start reacting to it. The CFO doesn't fear churn. They fear revenue they cannot model. The CRO feels it when NRR stalls because value didn't compound. And the board feels it when predictability drops and revenue depends on relationship instead of system. When continuity exists, revenue compounds. When it doesn't, revenue merely maintains. So here is the question I would leave every organization with. Can you explain your revenue model without talking about functions? Because if you can't, continuity doesn't exist and revenue won't compound. Sales win the deal, continuity win the revenue. If you own revenue, don't ignore the first handoff. It's where AI is rebuilding continuity. Subscribe to AI for Sales Edge. This is where revenue stops being managed by hands-off and start being designed as a system. Real stories, real results, no fluff.